This lecture series is something that really is about owning the work this college has historically done in the area of social justice. That happens because we are right here in Crown Heights. We are right here among people whose lives have been torn asunder by the absence of human rights. So the ability for us to regain traction and a voice and to establish ourselves as a college as a preeminent institution that owns the understanding and the complexities of the human dynamic and the political reality of social justice is very, very important. And I could not be happier with this start by welcoming Professor Villarosa to the college and to hopefully what will be the start of many, many longer relationships and longer conversations about this very vital topic.
In August, Linda was a part of the team that created the Times 1619 Project, which examined the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans. Her essay discusses enduring medical myths that began in slavery. In April 2018, her story, Why America's Black Mothers and Babies Are in a Life and Death Crisis, ran on the cover of the magazine. It looks at the effects of race, racism, and health care inequality on the infant and maternal mortality and was nominated for a National Magazine Award. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I want you guys to help me welcome Ms. Linda Villarosa.
Good morning. I cannot tell you how happy I am to be here. I thank everyone who facilitated my invitation to speak. And also, I'm really proud of the work you've done. I loved what Dr. Cruz said about social justice. The legacy lives here, and we do all know that. No matter who tries to co-opt that, we know it's you. I'm going to talk about race, health, and inequality for the first part of the lecture, and then for the second part, tell you how 250 years of enslavement and many years of inequality in our society affected the bodies of African Americans. So in our country, we have the most expensive health care in the world. We also arguably have the most advanced technology as far as health and medicine in the world. So why is there this disconnect between the health status of America compared to other wealthy countries? So here's a couple of examples. Here, we spend so much money on health care. There's the per capita spending, and we all know that because we all know every time you go to the doctor or any healthcare provider, it's super expensive. Yet we have the lowest life expectancy of the wealthy countries. So why, if our healthcare is so great and our country's so wealthy, are people living less years? And this is overall in America. Why are people living less years than people in other countries? Also, we're one of the only countries, wealthy countries, where life expectancy is actually declining. And this has started to happen in the last few years where we're looking at life expectancy and it's going down, which is very unusual, for a wealthy country like ours. We also have the highest infant mortality. So infant mortality is defined as when a baby dies for a pregnancy-related issue and also within the first year of life. So why in this rich country would we have the highest rate of infant mortality? So when this is discussed, it's often talked about as though it's a mystery, like what could be happening in America that's so strange given that they're so rich and have such good health care? Why do we have such poor health status compared to other wealthy countries? The issue is really hiding in plain sight. The issue is race. Probably know about that Black people live sicker and die quicker, that's how it's said, than people of other races and ethnicities. So we end up having poor health status as well as early death. So if Black America were its own country, we would have a health status that looked like one of the African countries that many here in America are trying to save. So Black life expectancy, though you might hear this new term, diseases of despair, about how white people are dying of the opioid crisis and all these things that is leading to our lowered life expectancy, Black people have the lowest, black men especially, have the lowest life expectancy than other race, gender groups. And that breaks my heart. Black babies are also 2 to 3 times more likely to die than a white baby. And this race gap is larger than it was, the gap is larger than it was in 1850 when black women were still enslaved. Also, if this race gap did not exist, there would be 4,000 additional babies alive today. So I'm going to start by talking about my cover story that ran in April, Why America's Black Mothers and Babies Are in a Life or Death Crisis. Because we are the only country where the number of women who die or almost die in childbirth, only wealthy country, is going up. A black mother is 3 to 4 times more likely to die or almost die in childbirth. And I was like, what? In our country? And New York City has the very worst rate. It's a black woman is 8 to 10 times more likely to die or almost die. And for every woman who dies, 70 to 100 almost die. Why is this? Is it, and I said this, is it only a question of poverty? Is it really, really poor women in terrible places that are dying? So this was the stat that really caught my eye and broke my heart. A black woman with an advanced degree, not just a high school graduate, not just a college education, but an advanced degree, is more likely to die or have her baby die than a white woman with an 8th grade education. So I became very interested in this topic and spent basically 9 months researching it. So this was my cover story, and the New York Times magazine felt so strong about it that they put the words over their own logo. So you see, you can't really see the New York Times magazine logo, so that means it's really an important topic. So I wanted to tell the story of what's going on in this country through the eyes and the life of one woman, Simone Landrum. So I found her, I was at a conference here, and I was very interested in doulas. So a doula is a person, usually a woman, who helps a woman who's pregnant during her pregnancy and during childbirth and delivery. So through a doula in New Orleans, I met Simone. So Simone was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, and she said, I want to tell my story because I don't want anything what happened to me to happen to another woman. She had been pregnant the year before with her little girl, Harmony, and she started getting really bad headaches. So when she told her doctor about the headaches, her doctor said, take Tylenol. And she said, the headaches are getting worse. And he said, take more Tylenol. So she's like young, so she's like in her 20s. So she was all on Instagram, and she stopped taking pictures of herself on Instagram because her face looked really swollen. Then she was in the doctor's office, and her blood pressure shot up, like in the doctor's office. So the doctor said, you need to calm down and relax so that your blood pressure goes down. So all of these signs, when put together, and I looked at her medical records to confirm everything, point to preeclampsia, which is high blood pressure during pregnancy. So that is a key reason people die or almost die, women almost die in pregnancy or die. So Simone, it wasn't quite time for her baby to come, the first one, the little girl, and she said, oh my God, my water broke. And then she looked down and it was blood. So she rushed to the hospital, and she passed out from the pain and from the blood loss. And when she woke up, she had almost died, and Harmony, the little baby, had died. So the following year, she's pregnant again, but she's terrified now because of what happened before. So she got a doula to be with her to make sure, she would be okay, to have someone advocating for her. So she told me her story. I was in New Orleans with her and the doula, and I looked at her and I said, who is going to be with you when you have the baby? Because she's really scared. And she said, just the doula. And I saw her looking at me because we had kind of like bonded. And then I realized I should come for the baby because I was basically finished the story. So the doula called me in December. The doula goes, the baby's coming. You need to jump on a plane and get here if you want to be here for the baby. So I was like, oh, okay, get it together. So I ended up going. I was on the plane, and the doula said, oh, she texted me, false alarm. The baby's actually not coming yet, but I was already on the plane. So I ended up spending a lot of time with the mom. We went to the doctor, and the baby's heartbeat was all over the place. We were looking at the monitor. So she was going into they were going to induce labor. So me, her, and the doula go to the delivery room, and remember, the doula is also a labor and delivery nurse by training, and I'm there. The medical providers, there was no people of color, not even a black nurse, not even a brown nurse. It was all white. They treated her so badly right in front of us. I was like, wait, the way they're treating her lines up with the research that I found when working on the story, that part of the reason that black women don't do so well in maternal mortality, why our statistics are so high, is because of racism and discrimination and bias in the very healthcare system that is supposed to be doing no harm. And I saw them talking down to her, asking her to tell the story of Harmony's death over and over to re-traumatize her while she's in labor. And then the weirdest part was her doctor was a woman. And that I had gone to the appointments with her. I met the woman. She said, oh, there's a slight chance I might not make it. It wasn't him. It was a stranger, a new doctor. He barely introduced himself, and he shoved his hands inside of her. I'm sitting there trying to be a journalist, but I'm like, my God, who is this? And why is he being so disrespectful? Then the interns and residents were going, hey, you should try it, deliver the baby. Hey, it's your turn. She's in pain. We're scared. She is a she has a high-risk pregnancy. They've traumatized her by asking her to tell the story over and over about Harmony. And it was kind of a miracle to me that she actually had that baby. But she did. He's fine. And the last part of this story is, although the hospital followed up on getting the baby to his doctor's appointments, they didn't follow up on her. But I started thinking, what is going on here? Like, why would they treat her so badly? But the other thing that I had done was I had done 30 interviews with experts around discrimination, both in society and in our healthcare system. And then I realized no one talks to them. Like, I was one of the few people who were interviewing a lot of these people who have spent their life's work looking at discrimination in healthcare and in society. And at one point, one of the women who I interviewed, she was from, I think, the University of North Carolina. And she said, I'm going to send you one of my studies. So she sends it to me, and it had 200 and some footnotes. So I said to her, why do you have so many footnotes here? And she said, because when you're talking about discrimination, race, and racism, no one believes you. So you have to prove every single thing. So what I did was I started to think, why is this maternal mortality thing happening here, and infant mortality? Why is the race gap bigger than during the years of enslavement? What is going on? And really came to the conclusion that two things are happening. One is that racism in society, especially when you combine gender discrimination, has an effect on our bodies. And so this kind of toxic stress that happens day in and day out takes a toll, and it shows up through maternal and infant mortality. That's one. And two, societal discrimination also shows itself in our current healthcare system. But that's not what most people think. Most people think that the idea that race is a risk factor for maternal mortality, infant mortality, early death, a lot of these things is our fault, and blames us. And so they think, oh, if you would just try harder, you wouldn't be poor. I saw this in the letters that came after I wrote that story about Simone Landrum and maternal and infant mortality, mostly blaming her. But you know what? I had an answer to that, because there was another woman who almost lost her baby during labor and delivery, and it was Serena Williams. And so even if you don't believe anything that this article said, and you are trying to shame a woman like Simone Landrum who lives in New Orleans, there is no way you can blame Serena Williams for what happened to her. But still, when she tried to tell the medical personnel what was going on with her when she was hemorrhaging, no one listened to her. And it happened twice in her case. Her baby was fine, but she spoke out about her ill treatment because of being a black woman. a lot of times when you look at this issue, or people that's not us look at it, they try to come up with different reasons, including genetics. So after this story, my story came out, I was speaking at a grand rounds at an OBGYN hospital, department at a hospital in Minneapolis. One of the things they said was, oh, we see a lot of women of African descent, first-generation African women, and they do so well in pregnancy. It's the African-American women who have so many problems. And I was like, really mad, but I did say, why do you think that is? They're like, oh, because African women bring from their countries this kind of kinship. I was like, well, hello, Black women invented kinship. And so I was so mad. And it was all white doctors. I had this study that says African women have babies at the normal birth weight. They look like the size of white babies. But within one generation of living in this country, Black babies, now they're not African, they're African American, become smaller. So something is going on in this country. There's something about growing up in America that seems to be bad for your baby's birth weight. So I think how we look at race in science and medicine and health is that race is a risk factor for some of the poor health outcomes, right? It's often said. But what if that isn't true? It's not race, some part of our culture or our biology that's the risk factor, but the way we're treated, and that is racism. So if race is a proxy for racism, which is a proxy for discrimination, we are the canaries in the coal mine for this because we've been studied so well. Black people have been studied really well because our bodies were worth so much. We were property, so you want to keep us healthy and alive. Nancy Krieger, who is at the Harvard School of Public Health, did a study looking at what happens when President Trump calls, Mexicans names and makes fun of Central Americans and makes fun of Muslims and, creates a travel ban. What happens when communities are traumatized? Communities that are the butt of his, cruelty. Children born of parents, mothers who were from the travel ban countries were smaller than they had been previously and smaller than white babies. So my next project was to look at how far this went back. And so that's where the 1619 project is. Who is about? So this project came out of Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is a Black woman at the New York Times Magazine, who is a MacArthur Genius Award winner. She said, we need to look at the anniversary, 1619, which was, I think, August 18th this summer, and look at what 400 years after the first enslaved person came to Virginia, what's the legacy of slavery on current systems of the country. So my job was to look at the healthcare system and medicine. I was asked to look at medical myths that started during slavery and have lasted through current day. So I know this is going to sound weird, but it was surprisingly easy. I started with the story of John Brown. So John Brown was an enslaved man in 1820s, 30s, and 40s. He was in Georgia. So he got sold to a doctor, lent to a doctor, so the doctor could do medical experiments on him. So it started, he was trying to figure out a cure for heat, when you get too hot. So he created these pills by putting John Brown in a pit of fire, covering him with a blanket so that the pit became 100 degrees hot. Only John Brown's neck stuck out, and then he'd feed John Brown the remedies until he passed out. So then he created this remedy and became rich. Next, he took John Brown, and he wanted to see how deep Black skin went. So he cut and scarred him until he was too weak to work in the fields to prove that Black skin was somehow different than white skin. This was his obsession. So John Brown, thank God, escaped and wrote about his experiences. So that's where I discovered him, because he wrote pretty much a lot about what happened to him. First myth that I was talking about was pain tolerance. So there was the idea that Black people during slave times had some superpower against pain. So it seems very obvious that that is a myth that worked well because it said, oh, that's good. So black people can't really feel the same level of pain. We can work them from sundown to sunup to sundown. We can whip them, we can beat them, we can torture them because they don't have the same pain tolerance. But I looked at two studies that came out in 2016, and both of them were of medical students, residents, and interns. If you have two patients, a black one and a white one, what's the pain difference? So these are medical students. The future doctors said that they thought that black people had more nerve endings, not true, thicker skin, again, not true, and lower sensitivity to pain. The second study was even worse. It was again medical students and residents in 2016, and it asked them, if you have two patients, a black one and a white one, and you take their hand and you slam it in a car door, or they come in with a broken bone, what's the level of pain? The majority of the doctors, residents, and medical students thought that black people could tolerate the pain better. So that myth has lasted all the way from the first years of enslavement. So the second myth was that we have inferior lungs. So this idea probably came about from Thomas Jefferson, who wrote it in a throwaway, and he wasn't even a doctor, he's a naturalist and obviously president. He wrote it, and then white Southern doctors grasped onto this medical myth and ran with it. They became experts in what was known as Negro Medicine. So they ended up pushing this myth forward that not only do black people have weak lungs, slavery is actually good for them because enslaved people are out there working and building up the lungs and getting fresh air and exercise. As ridiculous as this sounds, this was I looked it up, it's easy to find, in medical journals, in the proceedings of medical conferences. The main person who put this forward was a doctor named Samuel Cartwright. He seems like a complete crackpot. And one of his other theories was that there's a disease called drapetomania. And drapetomania happens when black people escape from enslavement. And he said, oh, it's an illness. However, he also used an instrument called the spirometer. This is the old school spirometer. This is a really good book, by the way. So he used a spirometer to measure lung function. So this is a machine you blow into. And he because of his theory that black people have inferior lungs, he said you have to put into the machine a 10 to 15% race correction. So that means we're inferior by 10 to 15%. Okay? So now, that was during his time, but the current day spirometer still has most of them still have the race correction of 10 to 15%. So that means if your doctor goes, and it's computerized now, can put, black woman into the spirometer, that means it automatically calibrates for a lung inferiority. But if all you do is put in that race calibration based on me being a black woman that still exists today, that's a leftover from that crazy Samuel Cartwright who was talking about drapetomania, something's wrong. The better thing to do is to realize that the discrimination in our healthcare system is not our fault. The poor health outcomes are not our fault. Stop blaming us for them. Stop trying to find a biological reason for this and really look within. I also think that even though we try to look for solutions to healthcare problems in more technology, what works to help solve this problem is putting care back into our healthcare system. So this is the doula collective that worked with Simone Landrum. They're a multiracial doula collective in New Orleans. They work with women for free. The doula that worked with Simone only earned $600 for all the work she did. She started when Simone was 6 months pregnant. She went all the way through helping her learn breastfeeding. So in California, they have the same maternal and infant mortality problems that the whole country does. So about 10 years ago, tried to look at why are women dying in childbirth? And then they came up with a set of clinical protocols and a checklist. And they also put a toolkit together so that everyone has the same tools to solve the problem in every hospital. So everything's uniform. And you know what? It worked. So the number of women in general who died in childbirth in California dropped by half. This is great news. But guess what happened to the race disparity? Nothing. It stayed exactly the same. So then, I'm not kidding, this happened 2 weeks ago. In California, a black woman legislator came up, there she is in the purple, came up with legislation that was signed into law last week that says any doctor who works with a pregnant woman in California must go through unconscious bias training. So that is in place now. But what if the, part of the answer, or a bigger part than we realize, is really about dignity, respect, kindness, and love? Thank you.